Ever been camping in the wilderness, surrounded by the sounds of nature? Now imagine those sounds include something that shouldn't be there. Something that looks like your friend, speaks like them, but isn't them at all. This is the tale of a camping trip gone horribly wrong. Welcome to the nightmare of Anansi's Goatman. Camping in the woods always seems like a peaceful escape from the world, but tonight's story takes that escape and turns it into a nightmare none of them saw coming. When you're surrounded by darkness, with only the stars above, how do you know who's real and who isn't? Put on your headphones, sit close to the fire, and remember, sometimes it's not the wild animals you should fear. This is Anansi's Goatman story. There's something about the woods at night that feels different from anywhere else. You could be with your friends, laughing and telling stories, but the moment the sun sets and the darkness creeps in, the world around you changes. You become hyper-aware of every crackling leaf, every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind through the trees. And that's when the fear sets in. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Just me, my cousin Trent, his girlfriend Lily, and a couple of friends, Tom, Carla, and Jace. We'd planned the camping trip for weeks, eager to escape the noise of the city and spend a few nights under the stars. We picked a spot deep in the woods, a place Trent had been to before. It was isolated, miles away from any trail, and perfect for a quiet weekend. That first night, everything was fine. We set up camp, started a fire, and spent hours talking and laughing. The moon was full, casting a silvery light over the trees, and the sound of the crackling fire mixed with the chirping of insects. It was peaceful. Around midnight, we all crawled into our tents. I shared a tent with Jace, while Trent and Lily were in the one next to us, and Tom and Carla in another. The sounds of the forest lulled me into sleep, until I woke up, heart pounding, to a noise outside the tent. It was faint at first, just the rustling of leaves. But then I heard something. Footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. I held my breath and listened, telling myself it was just an animal. But the footsteps got closer, and soon I could hear the unmistakable sound of someone, or something, moving outside the tent. "Jace," I whispered, nudging him awake. "You hear that?" He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "What?" "Shh." I motioned for him to listen. The footsteps had stopped. Everything was quiet again, and for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it. But then I heard a voice. It was Trent. "Hey, you guys up?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it was definitely him. Jace sat up, frowning. "What does Trent want this late?" Before I could respond, the zipper of our tent began to pull down. The flap opened, and Trent poked his head in, his face pale in the moonlight. "You guys okay?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "Yeah," Jace replied, rubbing his eyes. "What's up?" Trent hesitated. "I thought I heard something outside. Just wanted to make sure you guys were good." I exchanged a glance with Jace. "Yeah, we're fine. Probably just an animal." Trent nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably." His voice sounded uncertain. "Okay, well, good night." He zipped up the tent and disappeared into the darkness. Jace lay back down, muttering something about Trent being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning I asked Trent about the night before, but he seemed confused. "I didn't come to your tent last night," he said, frowning. "I was asleep the whole time." I blinked at him. "No, you did. You unzipped our tent and checked on us. You said you heard something." Trent shook his head. "Dude, I didn't, I swear." Jace overheard the conversation and laughed. "Maybe you were sleepwalking, man." But Trent wasn't laughing. He looked genuinely concerned. "I wasn't sleepwalking. I was out cold." A chill ran down my spine. If Trent didn't come to our tent, then who did? I brushed it off as some kind of mix-up and tried to enjoy the rest of the day. We spent most of it hiking and exploring the woods, and by the time we got back to camp, the strange incident from the night before had faded from my mind. But that night, things got worse. It was late again, and we were all sitting around the campfire, telling ghost stories like we had the night before. The firelight flickered across our faces, casting long shadows on the trees, and the woods around us felt more closed in, as if the darkness was pressing against the circle of light we'd created. That's when we heard it. A rustling in the bushes, followed by the sound of branches snapping, We all froze, eyes darting toward the source of the noise. Trent grabbed the flashlight and shone it into the trees, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. Probably just a deer, Lily said, but her voice was shaky. But then we heard something else. A voice, distant at first, but getting closer. "Hey, you guys up?" It was Trent's voice. The blood drained from my face as I turned to look at him. He was sitting right next to me, staring into the fire, his face lit by the orange glow. The voice called out again, louder this time. "You guys up?" Jace's eyes widened. "What the hell?" Trent stood up, shining the flashlight into the trees. "Who's there?" The voice didn't respond. Instead, the bushes rustled again, and we saw a figure step out of the trees. It looked like Trent. Same height, same build, same clothes. But something was wrong. His movements were jerky, unnatural, and his face was blank, as if he didn't know how to smile. The figure stopped at the edge of the firelight, staring at us. "Trent?" Jace whispered, his voice trembling. The real Trent took a step forward, his face pale. "That's not me." The thing that looked like Trent tilted its head, almost as if it were confused. Then, slowly, it began to walk toward us. We all jumped to our feet, backing away from the fire. The figure kept coming, its movements becoming more erratic, its head twitching unnaturally. "Stay back!" Trent shouted, holding the flashlight up like a weapon. But the figure didn't stop. It reached the edge of the fire, its blank eyes staring at us, and then it smiled. A twisted, unnatural smile that didn't belong on a human face. And then it spoke. "Hey, you guys up?" We didn't wait to find out what it wanted. We bolted, sprinting through the trees, our flashlights bouncing in the darkness. I could hear Lily and Carla screaming, and Jace was cursing under his breath. But all I could think about was getting away from that thing. The sound of footsteps followed us, heavy and deliberate, but I didn't dare look back. I kept running, branches slashing at my arms and face, my heart pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing and collapsed, gasping for breath. The footsteps had stopped, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Is everyone okay?" I panted, looking around. Lily was crying, her face buried in Trent's chest, and Carla looked pale, her eyes wide with fear. Jace was pacing, his hands on his head, muttering to himself. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Trent replied, his face grim, "but it looked like me." We sat in silence for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The fire was a distant glow through the trees, but none of us wanted to go back. Not with that thing still out there. It was Carla who broke the silence. "It's the Goatman." We all turned to look at her, confused. "What?" I asked. "The Goatman," she repeated. "I've heard stories about it. It's a shapeshifter, a creature that mimics the appearance of people. It lures its victims by pretending to be someone they know." Lily sniffed, wiping her eyes. "That's not real." Carla shrugged. "Maybe not, but what else could it be?" None of us had an answer. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed in the clearing, huddled together, listening to every sound, every rustle in the bushes, waiting for the Goatman, or whatever it was, to come back. By dawn, we were exhausted, but we knew we couldn't stay in the woods any longer. We packed up our camp as quickly as we could, constantly looking over our shoulders, and started the long hike back to the car. The woods felt different now. The trees, once so peaceful and inviting, seemed to close in around us, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab us. Every sound made us jump, every shadow looked like the Goatman, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't until we reached the car that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. We threw our gear into the trunk and piled in, slamming the doors shut as if the thin metal of the car could protect us from whatever was out there. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the Goatman standing at the edge of the road watching us leave. But there was nothing. So they escaped the woods. But did they really escape the Goatman? There are stories out there. Stories of creatures that can take on the faces of those you trust. Creatures that mimic their movements, their voices. But when you're alone in the wilderness, How do you know who's real and who's not? Until next time, my dear listeners, remember, always keep the fire burning bright and watch closely, because the Goatman could be closer than you think.